did you wake again? You've been sleeping so uneasy. Is there anything I can do? Perhaps a distraction. I'm sure there's a story or two in here that's sure to cheer you up. Nothing like a good tale to banish the evil spirits. And instill calm and safety. The Legend of Vivia. As dawn first broke on a bitter cold morning in January 1870, a guard patrolling the grounds surrounding Fort Gibson, Indian Territory, rushed to report to the commanding officer. He had found the frozen body of young Private Thomas lying across a grave in the cemetery near the fort. The body was taken to the fort's infirmary. As it was being examined to determine the cause of death, a most unusual discovery was made. Private Thomas, who had enlisted only a few weeks earlier, was found during the examination to be a woman. As the commanding officer and his staff were reviewing these strange circumstances and wondering how Thomas had succeeded in passing herself off as a man, an old priest at the fort came forward with one of the most romantic and unusual stories in the annals of military history. Young Thomas had related her secret to the priest in confidence only a few days prior to her death. The priest's story was the beginning of the legend of Vivia that has been told ever since by families living in and around Fort Gibson in what is now eastern Oklahoma. Vivia Thomas was the high-spirited daughter of a wealthy Boston family. She had been educated at the finest schools in the East and regularly attended Boston society's finest affairs. It was at one of the many Boston society balls that were held during the years following the Civil War that Vivia met and fell in love with a handsome young lieutenant. After several months of courtship, their engagement and marriage plans were announced at a ball in their honor. Shortly before the wedding date, however, the lieutenant, who had been more intrigued by Vivia's wealth and place in society, than by her beauty, suddenly disappeared. He left Vivia a note explaining that he was going west in search of adventure, which he preferred to marriage and the security of Boston society. Broken-hearted and seeking revenge for the embarrassment caused her and her family, Vivia left home in search for a lover who had betrayed her. When she learned that the lieutenant had been stationed at Fort Gibson, Indian Territory, her long journey began. The trip was extremely difficult, especially for a Boston girl who had known only luxury in her pampered youth. But Vivia's vengeful heart pushed her onward. During the months of her journey, she cut her hair in a manly fashion and dressed in men's attire. At first, her motive for disguising herself as a man was to provide the protection a male appearance offered as she traveled through the rugged frontier into Indian Territory. But her disguise had proven so successful that she decided to use it to get close to her faithless lover by enlisting in the army at Fort Gibson. Her trick worked, and when she reached the fort, she was enlisted in the U.S. Cavalry under an assumed first name. During the months that followed, Vivia somehow avoided detection. Her former lover never recognized her. She carefully observed him, all while deciding how she would satisfy the burning hatred within her. The lieutenant had an Indian girlfriend who lived a short distance from the fort. He visited her each evening. On several occasions, Vivia followed him to the girl's home, and on each occasion, her bitterness grew. On a cold winter evening during the end of December 1869, Vivia followed the lieutenant on his trip. This time, she hid behind a large rock near a point on the trail where it crossed a small stream. The moon was full, and she had a good view of the trail from behind the stone. In the cold, brisk winter air, she could hear the galloping of the lieutenant's horse as he returned to the fort. Just as he crossed the stream, he caught the full charge of Vivia's rifle in the chest and fell hard from his horse to the frozen ground. The next morning, his body was found by a passerby and brought to the fort. fruitless investigation was held and was finally dropped with the assumption that the lieutenant had been killed by Indians who resented his affection for the Indian maiden. At first, Vivia was happy and relieved. She had achieved the revenge she had sought for so many months. But after a few days had passed, she became deeply grieved, remorseful, and disturbed over killing the only man she had ever loved. She began leaving quarters after sundown and going to the lieutenant's grave, where she would weep for hours and pray for forgiveness. Weak with pneumonia she contracted from long nights of exposure, Vivia apparently collapsed over the grave and froze to death during the night of January 7th, 1870. The romantic story of this brave young girl from Boston, and the fact that she was the only female who had served undetected in the military, deeply touched the commanding officer and other soldiers at the fort. In the center of the National Cemetery near the fort, a large circle known as the Circle of Honor was set aside for the burial of soldiers who had distinguished themselves as military heroes or outstanding leaders. Among the graves within the Circle of Honor, one stone seems out of place. The stone simply reads, Vivia Thomas, January 7th, 1870. I don't know about distinguish themselves as military heroes, but I fully and truly understand why these men may have been so moved by this young girl's tragic love story. Surely, no man's heart, no matter how cold and hard, can possibly be as frozen as the ground she died on. Here we see a beautiful drawing of Vivia in her military uniform, kneeling beside her dead lover's grave. You can almost feel the emotion in each stroke of the pen. The hills and crosses are easily distinguishable, with minimal detail on the clouds in the distance. Her face is beautifully shaded, looking distinctly sorrowful. Her posture is regretful and somewhat exhausted. She's holding herself up with all the strength she has left. I wonder if at that moment she knew that she would soon follow her lover, whom she couldn't forgive. The story teaches us that we must not give in to feelings of hatred and vengeance. There's always regret that comes after the fact. Okay, so maybe this one didn't cheer you up, but what of Wild Bill Hickock's Ozark Gunfight? Sounds more promising. Although Ned Buntline's 400 action novels, or penny dreadfuls, as they were called, were pure fiction, the personalities he wrote about were often real, and very quickly became the public heroes of the Old West. James Butler, Wild Bill Hickock, was one of the frontier characters Buntline chose to immortalize in his work. Wild Bill was born in Troy Grove, Illinois, on May 27, 1837. When he was still a teenager, Hickock's reputation and skill with a gun earned him a marshal's job in Monticello Township, Illinois. During the Civil War, Hickock was a Union sharpshooter and scout. Much of his wartime activity was in the Ozarks. He was known to have participated in the Battle of Pea Ridge in Arkansas and in other battles in the region, and he also served the Union as a spy, posing as a Confederate throughout southern Missouri and Arkansas. It is generally believed that it was during this time that Hickock first met Dave Tutt of Yellville, Arkansas. Like most former scouts and Confederate guerrillas, Dave Tutt had become quite proficient with a gun. In early 1865, he moved with his widowed mother and sister to Springfield, Missouri. Here they had lived in peace until Wild Bill Hickock showed up in the city. Hickock had evidently returned to Springfield to resume the love affair he had started during the war with a woman named Savannah Moore. A while later, they apparently had a fight and broke up for a few weeks. During this time, Dave Tutt began to seek Savannah's affection. Although many Hickock historians feel that the quarrel between Hickock and Tutt had started long before their arrival to Springfield, Tutt's affair with Hickock's former lover no doubt further divided the two men. Still more kindling was added to the fire when Hickock began courting Tutt's sister. Tutt's mother strongly opposed this relationship. She had no use for Yanks, especially those who had served as spies. Tutt, who shared his mother's feelings, confronted Hickock on the street one day and asked him to stop seeing his sister. A short time later, Hickock, Tad, and several other men were playing cards at the Leon House, also known as the Old Southern Hotel, on the east side of South Street, near the Springfield Square. After Hickock won most of Ted's money, Ted reminded him of a $35 debt from a previous card game. Hickock said he only owed Ted $25 and laid that sum on the table. As Ted took the money from the table, he also picked up Hickock's gold watch, explaining, "This ought to cover the extra 10 bill. Hickock immediately rose from his chair and commanded, "Put the watch back, Dave." Todd ignored Hickock, however, and hurriedly left with the watch. During the next several days, the tension between the two men grew. Springfield citizens quietly waited around the square for the showdown that was fast becoming inevitable. On July 21st, 1865, the confrontation finally came. Ted's friends notified Hickock that Ted would be crossing the square at 6 p.m. if he wanted to try to get his watch back. Hickock responded, "You can't take my watch across the square unless dead men can walk." At exactly 6 p.m., as hundreds of Springfield citizens gathered in doorways and alleys around the square, Tut appeared on one side and Wild Bill on the other. Hickock called a warning to Tut, advising him not to attempt to cross the square if he hoped to live. Once more ignoring Hickock, Tut started across the square. As he did, he drew his gun. Hickock responded quickly. Both men fired simultaneously. Tut fell dead, a bullet through his heart. Hickock turned quickly toward Tut's friends, who by then had also drawn their weapons, and exclaimed, "Put your arms up, man, or there will be more than one man die here today." The men then put their guns away, and slowly the crowd dispersed. Although Hickock's trial for murder was long and bitter, the jury found him innocent, declaring the shooting an act of self-defense. After his release, Hickock was no longer interested in Savannah Moore, and Ted's sister wanted nothing to do with the man who had killed her brother. Wild Bill soon left Springfield to become a deputy U.S. Marshal in Kansas. Over the years, his reputation as a lawman and gunfighter grew, aided in large part by Ned Buntline's books featuring many fictitious Hickock exploits throughout the West. Those who were closely involved with Hickock and Dave Tutt often commented that there was an undercurrent of women problems in the Hickock-Tutt quarrel, and that women and gambling just don't mix. Exactly what the real problem between these men was on that summer day in Springfield, no one will ever know. It is certain, however, that it was more than Wild Bill Hickok's $10 watch. Because I know you like to put a face to a name, here's an early photograph of Wild Bill, where you can truly see the stubbornness in his eyes. This is the face of a man who truly will not bend the knee to anyone for any reason. The long, loose hair and handlebar mustache speak of a person who lives by his own rules, appropriate for the time you lived in, I'm sure. It truly was a simpler time then. Quarrels were simple. Disputes could be solved with gunfights. Sometimes I feel that with all our modern comforts and conveniences, we have traded a sense of freedom and adventure and wonder. But I feel that the next story might rekindle some of that a little bit. Heaven Runestones. Plateau Mountain, named by early French trappers, lies near the city of Havana in eastern Oklahoma. In the late 1870s, a most unusual discovery was made there. A large stone, 12 feet high, 10 feet wide, and 16 inches thick, was found to be inscribed with 8 letters or markings of unknown origin. Since Indian markings are found on rocks and bluffs throughout the Ozarks, it was assumed that the inscription on the Heavener stone was also carved by Indians, and it was referred to for many years as Indian Rock. Around 1923, however, Carl Camera began to study the stone in a new light. He copied the markings and sent them to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. for further study. The resulting report indicated that the characters were written in runic, an ancient Scandinavian writing system which has not been used for centuries. Thus, the stone was first recognized as a truly significant archaeological find. Gloria Farley of Havana, who first saw the stone as a child in 1928, has been actively involved in its study ever since. Over the years, she says, Several other stones with similar markings have been found in the area. Unfortunately, all but 2 have been destroyed by treasure seekers. In 1959, a Viking historian, a geologist, and members of the Oklahoma State Historical Society studied the Heavener stone and confirmed that the markings were definitely not Indian, French, or Spanish, but rather of Viking origin. In 1965, the state of Oklahoma officially recognized the importance of the stone to our national history and designated the area as a state park. To protect it from vandalism, the stone was enclosed in a metal cage. Later, to prevent further erosion by the elements, it was covered. Smithsonian experts on the ancient runic alphabet surmise that 6 of the markings are in Old Norse writing, first used in 300 AD, while the other 2 are typical of later Scandinavian writing, first used in 800 AD. Although these scholars felt they had succeeded in determining the origin of the inscriptions, their meaning remained a mystery. And in 1967, the late Elf Monge attempted to decipher the markings by using an ancient form of code writing employed by Norse clergymen in the days of the Vikings to hide dates and runic inscriptions. Monge had been born in Norway and had served as a cryptographer for the U.S. Army for many years. He concluded that the runes represented a Norse crypto puzzle that meant November 11th, 1012, St. Martin's Day. Similar analysis of a runic script at Poteau, Oklahoma yielded the date November 11th, 1017, of a Tulsa area marking December 22nd, 1022, and of a stone in Shawnee, Oklahoma, November 24th, 1024. How could the Vikings have found their way to these remote sites so far from the sea? Did a Viking ship sail up the Mississippi River from the Gulf of Mexico, then up the Arkansas, and finally into the waters of the Poteau River of eastern Oklahoma? Scholars have not yet settled the controversy surrounding these stones and the true meaning of their runic inscriptions. Perhaps they never will. All I can say for certain is that these unique monuments point eloquently but mysteriously back into the scenes of the distant past, long before Columbus was credited with discovering America in 1492. Such a his story, I would love to visit this natural park sometime. Maybe we would have to adjust the route of our treasure adventure yet again. But this time, not to take anything, but to view, gaze, and wonder, and respect nature and history as it deserves to be respected. The next story is called Kingston's First Telephone. The Northwest Arkansas community of Kingston was established on the banks of the Kings River by a man named King in 1853. The Madison County town remained a quiet farming community until the railroad arrived in the 1870s and provided a ready market for the timber in the surrounding hills. With the rapid growth of the timber industry, the community also began to grow. Joel N. Bunch, a 24-year-old teacher in the local school, recognized the need for a good general merchandise store in the area to serve the growing population. With his total assets of $1,000, he arranged to purchase a small store building in the northwest corner of the Kingston Square, bought a small stock of merchandise, and began business in 1880. The store has remained in the Bunch family over its century-long history and has maintained its original appearance. The fact that it is one of the Ozarks' oldest family-owned businesses, combined with its 1890 general store atmosphere, has made the Kingston Bunch store an Ozark tourist attraction. Hugh Bunch often relates an amusing story about the region's first telephone installed in the store in 1900. A great deal of excitement was generated among the area citizens. A man named John Rogers was especially interested. John watched the line construction crews daily. After the line reached the Bunch store, there was a delay of a few weeks before the delivery of the telephone for hookup. Rogers came by the store each day to inquire about it. One day, Larkin Bunch saw him coming down the road and decided to have some fun. The store had just received a new seat sewer, which Rogers had not seen. Larkin hung the sewer on the wall near the telephone line and told Rogers the phone had finally arrived. Rogers expressed interest in using it, but didn't know how, and was somewhat afraid. It's simple, Larkin Bunch told him. Just stick your head in the sack, turn the handle, and speak loudly. Who'll I call? Rogers replied. Call Tom Skaggs in Huntsville and ask the price of maple sugar, Larkin instructed. Rogers then inserted his head nervously into the sack, turned the handle, and yelled loudly, Tom Skaggs! Tom Skaggs! What's the price of maple sugar? When he realized he had been the victim of a practical joke, Rogers refused to return to the bunch store for several weeks. You see a black and white photograph of the Kingston bunch store, looking to be in mild disrepair at that. But if you pay no mind to the broken windows, you can almost see the building being fully operational. The ever-bright white siding, the inviting wooden bench, and the whole atmosphere of the picture seems to make you want to believe they're merely closed for a holiday. I wonder if that building still stands today. What do you think? I think that it's good to have a sense of humor. We have to be able to laugh at things, otherwise life would be too triste and serious to bear, would it not? I take it you would like to hear one more story. Okay. This last story is called Mule Lore. Thousands of Ozark sons and daughters were clothed, fed, and educated as a result of an Ozark mule's labor. Thousands of acres were cleared by mules for cities, highways, and institutions. Prior to World War II, the mule team was perhaps the Ozark farmers' most valuable possession. A whole generation has grown up since the era of the mule. Many people don't even know what a mule is. For the benefit of those who didn't experience the mule era, here's a bit of explanation. First, a mule is a cross between a large mare horse and a jack. Most male mules are sterile and unable to reproduce. The mule is strong, shrewd, stubborn, and loyal to its owner. The mule was also more adaptable to the rocky hillside Ozark farms than the horse, and had better endurance for long hours in the field. A good mule stood 16 hands high and weighed 700 pounds. The quality of a mule was generally determined by its size and the slickness of its coat, rather than by the general conformation horses are judged by. A good mule team usually sold for about $800. But with the importance of the mule in early Ozark life came the mule tall tales that are also gradually being lost with time. While the women did the shopping Saturdays, the men gathered on the street corners and swapped mule stories. Arguments as to whether a mule brayed hee-haw or haw-hee, and whether or not a mule could bray with its tail tied down, would go for hours. Typical of a good Ozark mule story was this one of my grandfather's favorites. Back in the days when mule trading was big business, two Chicago businessmen decided they would come to the Ozarks, where they could buy mules cheap from the hillbillies and ship them north for high prices. They put the word out that they were in the area to buy mules, but they found the Ozark natives to be skeptical and could find no mules for sale. Realizing the Chicagoans were ripe for the taking, two hillbillies approached them. "We don't have no mules for sale now," the hillbilly said, "but we got some mule eggs cheap, only $50 a piece." The city slickers agreed to buy all the eggs they had. The hillbillies then painted watermelon silver and brought several in a wheelbarrow to the men from Chicago, collected their money, and departed hastily. As the businessmen were pushing a wheelbarrow of mule eggs to the train they were to take back to Chicago, one of the eggs rolled off down a slope and broke open. Just at this moment, a jackrabbit ran from the spot where the egg had fallen. One of the men took off after it, but of course he was soon left behind, breathless. "Oh, shucks," the other man said. "Darn mule would have been too fast to plow with anyway." If you look at this photograph of Ozark mules in Rogers, Arkansas, you can see just how large these animals are, even compared to grown men. A mule's head appears to be almost the length of a man's torso. If you've never seen a mule before, you might picture something closer to a donkey, or maybe a horse. But they are quite sizable, and appear quite fit indeed. I find photographs like these to be absolutely invaluable relics of modern history. It's one thing reading books and watching the words take on form in your mind, but seeing a snapshot of a past reality, little glimpses of times gone by, you might realize that your imagination is simply that, and that reality was much different from what we envisioned. That's why we must do what we can to preserve history in text, in artifacts, and in pictures, so that future generations will know true from false, authenticity from fabrication, and factuality from imagination. Both are equally important, you see, but one is no substitute for the other. The moral of the story: do not mess with the hillbillies. I would probably have believed their tale of mule eggs, having never seen a mule in my life. I knew I'd find one that would cheer you up. It's time for bed now. Tomorrow is a new day. Close your eyes, and this time, dream up something beautiful.